Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program. Imagine being told that somewhere inside the U.S. government's intelligence community, a classified program existed that attempted to spy on distant locations, not with satellites, aircraft, or hidden cameras, but with the human mind. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction novel. Yet, for more than 2 decades, various branches of the United States government funded and investigated exactly that possibility. The program eventually became known as Project Stargate. Its goal was simple in concept but extraordinary in implication. Could certain individuals perceive people, places, or events located thousands of miles away using only their consciousness? Today, Project Stargate remains one of the most fascinating intersections of military intelligence, psychology, parapsychology, and Cold War history. Some believe it uncovered evidence that human consciousness possesses abilities science has yet to explain. Others argue it represents an expensive government experiment that ultimately failed to produce reliable intelligence. The truth is more nuanced and far stranger than either extreme. In this audiobook, we'll explore the documented history of Project Stargate from its earliest beginnings during the Cold War through its eventual declassification. We'll examine why the U.S. government became interested in psychic phenomena, who the key figures were, how remote viewing sessions were conducted, and what official investigations concluded. We'll also separate documented facts from decades of myths, rumors, and internet speculation. Because while countless stories have been attached to Project Stargate, including alien bases, time travel, secret civilizations, and hidden technologies, many of those claims have little or no connection to the actual government documents. Instead, we'll focus on what is known, what remains uncertain, and why this unusual intelligence program continues to capture public imagination decades after it officially ended. Whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or simply curious about one of the CIA's most unusual programs, Project Stargate offers an extraordinary glimpse into a period when national security concerns led governments to investigate the limits of the human mind. So dim the lights, keep an open but critical mind, and join us as we uncover the remarkable story behind one of America's most mysterious classified programs. This is the story of Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program. Part 1: The Cold War and the Search for Extraordinary Intelligence. To understand why Project Stargate ever existed, we first need to travel back to one of the most tense periods in modern history, the Cold War. Following the end of the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's 2 dominant superpowers. Although they never fought one another directly on a large battlefield, they engaged in a decades-long struggle for military superiority, technological advancement, political influence, and intelligence gathering. Every breakthrough mattered. Every secret mattered. Every possible advantage could mean the difference between peace and catastrophe. By the 1950s and 1960s, intelligence agencies on both sides were investing enormous resources into espionage. Spy satellites photographed military installations from orbit. Listening stations intercepted radio communications. Double agents infiltrated governments. New aircraft flew higher and faster than ever before. But despite these advances, intelligence officers still faced enormous challenges. Some military facilities were hidden deep underground. Others were protected by layers of secrecy. Certain weapons programs could remain invisible for years. The ability to gather information without physically entering hostile territory became one of the greatest goals of modern espionage. Then reports began circulating that the Soviet Union might be investigating something even more unusual. Western intelligence analysts heard rumors that Soviet researchers were studying psychic phenomena. Stories suggested they were experimenting with telepathy, psychokinesis, hypnosis, and other forms of extrasensory perception. Some reports claimed Soviet funding for paranormal research reached millions of dollars. Whether those estimates were accurate remains debated. However, what mattered was not necessarily whether the Soviets were succeeding. What mattered was that American intelligence officials believed they might be trying. During the Cold War, simply believing an adversary was developing a revolutionary capability could trigger an immediate response. If there was even a small chance that psychic abilities could become useful in intelligence work, many officials believed it would be irresponsible not to investigate. This mindset was hardly unique. The Cold War inspired research into numerous unconventional technologies. Governments explored everything from mind control experiments and behavior modification to advanced surveillance systems, chemical agents, and cutting-edge aerospace projects. Within that atmosphere, studying psychic perception did not seem quite as unbelievable as it might today. The question was simple. Could the human mind somehow acquire information beyond the known five senses? If the answer were yes, even occasionally, the military implications would be enormous. Imagine being able to describe a secret missile base thousands of miles away. Imagine locating a kidnapped diplomat without sending a single operative. Imagine identifying hidden submarines beneath the ocean. Imagine learning enemy plans without intercepting a single message. Even a modest success rate could transform intelligence gathering forever. As interest grew, scientists, psychologists, and intelligence officials began searching for researchers willing to investigate these extraordinary claims using controlled experiments rather than superstition. This search would eventually lead to a research institute in California, where two physicists were about to launch one of the strangest scientific collaborations ever funded by the U.S. government. It was there that the foundations of what would eventually become Project Stargate were first established. And it all began with one extraordinary question. Can consciousness reach beyond the limits of the human body? Part 2. The Stanford Research Institute and the Birth of Remote Viewing. In the early 1970s, the search for answers led government officials to an unlikely place. The Stanford Research Institute, commonly known as SRI in Menlo Park, California. Despite its name, SRI was an independent research organization, not part of Stanford University, although it had historical ties to the institution. It was already well known for conducting advanced research in engineering, medicine, computer science, and defense-related technologies. If anyone were going to investigate extraordinary claims using scientific methods, SRI seemed like a logical choice. Two researchers would soon become central figures in what followed, physicists Dr. Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ. Unlike many scientists of the era, they were willing to examine reports of psychic phenomena without immediately dismissing them. Their approach was straightforward. If psychic perception existed, it should be possible to test it under controlled laboratory conditions. If it did not exist, careful experimentation should reveal that as well. Their work attracted the attention of government agencies interested in unconventional intelligence methods. Funding soon began flowing into experiments designed to answer one specific question. Could a person accurately describe a distant location that they had never seen? This became known as remote viewing. Unlike traditional ideas of clairvoyance or fortune-telling, remote viewing followed a structured process. A participant, called the viewer, would sit quietly in a controlled room. Another person, often called the monitor, guided the session while remaining careful not to provide clues. Meanwhile, a separate target was randomly selected. It might be a building, a bridge, a mountain, a military installation, or another physical location somewhere in the world. The viewer was given no information about the target, no photographs, no maps, no names, only a simple instruction. Describe whatever impressions come to mind. Rather than attempting dramatic visions, viewers were encouraged to report even the smallest sensations. Shapes, textures, temperatures, colors, sounds, emotions. They were instructed not to guess, not to analyze, not to force an answer. Instead, they simply described whatever entered their awareness. Often these first impressions appeared vague or fragmented. A curved structure, open water, metallic objects, tall vertical forms, bright light, a sense of movement. Only after the session ended would researchers compare the descriptions with the actual target. Some sessions appeared remarkably accurate. Others were completely wrong. The challenge was determining whether successful results exceeded what might occur by coincidence alone. Among the earliest and most famous participants was artist and psychic Ingo Swann. Swann possessed an unusual ability to produce detailed sketches based on what he claimed to perceive mentally. His performances impressed enough observers that additional funding followed. Another notable participant was Pat Price, a former police commissioner. Price reportedly produced descriptions of military facilities and industrial sites that some intelligence officers considered surprisingly detailed. Supporters pointed to these successes as evidence that remote viewing deserved further investigation. Critics argued that selective reporting, vague descriptions, unconscious cueing, and confirmation bias could explain many of the apparent hits. The debate had begun. Yet regardless of differing opinions, one fact was undeniable. The U.S. government was now investing real money into the scientific investigation of psychic perception. What had started as a small research project was rapidly evolving into something much larger. Over the coming years, remote viewing would move beyond the laboratory and into the world of military intelligence, where viewers would be asked to locate hostages, identify secret facilities, and gather information that conventional espionage could not obtain. The experiment was no longer purely scientific. It was becoming operational, and that would change everything. Part 3. From laboratory experiment to intelligence operation. As interest in remote viewing continued to grow, the program gradually shifted from academic research to military application. If remote viewing could produce useful information under laboratory conditions, intelligence officials wanted to know whether it could work in the real world. The stakes were much higher. Laboratory experiments involved hidden objects or randomly selected locations. Operational intelligence involved national security. Lives could be at risk. Military decisions might depend on the information provided. During the 1970s and 1980s, responsibility for the program passed through several government organizations. Among them were the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, the U.S. Army, and other intelligence agencies. The program itself changed names multiple times over the years. Among those names were Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and finally, Stargate. The changing names reflected administrative reorganizations rather than entirely new projects. Although each phase introduced new procedures and leadership, the central goal remained the same. Could trained remote viewers provide intelligence that conventional methods could not? To improve consistency, researchers developed increasingly structured techniques. One of the most influential methods became known as controlled remote viewing, or CRV. This system was largely developed by Ingo Swann. Instead of relying on spontaneous psychic impressions, viewers followed a carefully organized sequence of steps. They recorded immediate sensory impressions before allowing analytical thoughts to interfere. Simple observations came first. Rough shapes, lines, textures, temperatures, colors. Only later were viewers encouraged to sketch larger structures or describe possible activities at the target. The purpose was to reduce imagination and encourage disciplined observation. Whether the method actually improved accuracy remains debated, but many participants believed it helped organize their experiences. Training itself could last months or even years. Viewers practiced separating genuine first impressions from assumptions and mental interpretation. They learned to recognize what they called analytical overlay, the tendency of the conscious mind to invent explanations before enough information had been gathered. For example, a viewer might initially perceive a large circular object. The correct approach was to write large circular structure. Jumping immediately to radar dish or water tower was discouraged unless additional impressions supported that conclusion. According to instructors, disciplined observation was more valuable than dramatic guesses. As the program matured, viewers were assigned increasingly difficult targets. Some involved suspected Soviet military installations. Others focused on aircraft, submarines, missile systems, research laboratories, or hidden weapons facilities. Occasionally, remote viewers were asked to assist in locating missing aircraft, fugitives, or kidnapped individuals. The results varied widely. Some sessions produced descriptions that intelligence officers considered surprisingly useful. Others generated information that proved inaccurate or impossible to verify. Because many targets involved highly classified operations, evaluating success became difficult. Intelligence work rarely provides immediate answers. A description might appear meaningless one day, only to gain significance months later when new evidence emerged. Supporters argued this made judging the program exceptionally challenging. Critics countered that such flexibility made almost any result appear successful in hindsight. One characteristic distinguished Project Stargate from many popular portrayals. Contrary to Hollywood-style depictions, remote viewers were rarely expected to produce perfect photographs in their minds. Instead, sessions often consisted of fragmented impressions, a sense of cold, large concrete surfaces, the smell of chemicals, angular structures, water nearby, heavy machinery. Analysts then attempted to combine those fragments with information gathered through conventional intelligence methods. Remote viewing was generally treated as one possible source of information, not as a replacement for satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, intercepted communications, or human spies. Even within the intelligence community, belief in the program was far from universal. Some officials became enthusiastic supporters, others remained deeply skeptical. But as long as the possibility existed that remote viewing might provide even a slight advantage during the Cold War, the program continued, and soon several cases would emerge that supporters described as extraordinary successes, cases that would become central to the legend of Project Stargate and continue to spark debate decades after the program ended. Part 4. The most famous remote viewing cases. As Project Stargate expanded, a number of remote viewing sessions became legendary. Supporters pointed to these cases as evidence that something extraordinary had occurred. Skeptics argued they demonstrated the dangers of selective memory, vague interpretations, and confirmation bias. Many of these sessions remain controversial to this day. One of the best-known remote viewers was Joseph McMoneagle. A highly decorated U.S. Army intelligence officer, McMoneagle became known within the program as Remote Viewer Number 1. He participated in hundreds of operational sessions and was widely regarded by colleagues as one of the program's most consistent performers. Among his most famous assignments was a target located deep inside the Soviet Union. Without being told what the target represented, McMoneagle described an enormous submarine under construction. He sketched a massive vessel unlike any known Soviet submarine at the time. His drawings included unusual design features and suggested the craft was significantly larger than existing submarines. Sometime later, satellite imagery reportedly revealed the construction of what NATO would eventually identify as the Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarine, the largest submarine ever built. Supporters viewed this as one of the strongest examples of successful remote viewing. Critics noted that many details remained open to interpretation and questioned whether prior intelligence or subconscious clues could have influenced the session. Another frequently cited case involved the search for a missing aircraft. Remote viewers were asked to describe the location of a crashed plane. Some believed their descriptions helped narrow the search area. Others argued the information was too general to be operationally useful. Because many search and rescue operations involve incomplete records and classified information, it remains difficult to determine exactly how much influence the remote viewing sessions had on the final outcome. Remote viewers were also assigned to hostage situations. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies occasionally hoped that viewers might identify the location or condition of individuals being held captive overseas. Sessions often produced descriptions of buildings, landscapes, surrounding terrain, and the emotional state of the hostages. Some reports suggested these descriptions aligned with information obtained through conventional intelligence. Others failed to match reality at all. These mixed results became a recurring pattern throughout the program's history. One particularly unusual assignment involved locating hidden military installations. Viewers described underground structures, missile sites, aircraft hangars, and research facilities. Sometimes later intelligence appeared to support portions of their observations. In other cases, nothing could be confirmed. Supporters argued that even partial successes justified continued research. Skeptics countered that intelligence analysts naturally focused on correct details while overlooking the numerous inaccuracies. This tendency, known as confirmation bias, can make ordinary coincidences appear far more impressive than they actually are. Perhaps no aspect of Project Stargate generated more public fascination than reports involving foreign leaders. Some accounts claimed remote viewers attempted to observe senior Soviet officials or gain insight into sensitive political meetings. According to former participants, viewers occasionally described offices, conference rooms, or conversations occurring thousands of miles away. However, verifying such claims proved nearly impossible. Much of the supporting evidence remained classified or anecdotal. As years passed, stories surrounding Project Stargate grew increasingly sensational. Books, documentaries, television programs, and internet discussions began linking the project to aliens, Area 51, ancient civilizations, hidden dimensions, and time travel. While these stories captured the public imagination, historians have found little evidence connecting most of these extraordinary claims to the documented government program itself. The official records primarily describe experiments in remote viewing for intelligence purposes, not investigations into extraterrestrials or supernatural conspiracies. That distinction is important. Separating documented history from later mythology allows us to better understand what Project Stargate actually was and what it was not. Even without the more sensational claims, the verified history remains remarkable. For over 20 years, multiple U.S. government agencies continued funding a program based on the possibility that human consciousness might access information beyond the reach of the known senses. The question was no longer whether the experiments had taken place. The documents proved they had. The real debate centered on a far more difficult question. Did they actually work? Part 5. The Science, the Skeptics, and the Believers. As Project Stargate continued through the 1980s, two very different camps emerged. One believed the program was uncovering evidence that human consciousness possessed abilities science had not yet explained. The other believed decades of research had failed to demonstrate anything beyond coincidence, expectation, and human psychology. The debate continues to this day. Those who supported the research pointed to the sheer number of experiments conducted over many years. Thousands of remote viewing sessions had been performed. Some appeared to contain strikingly accurate descriptions of distant locations, objects, or events. Supporters argued that while no individual session proved psychic perception, the overall pattern deserved serious scientific attention. Several statistical studies suggested that certain viewers performed better than chance. Researchers also emphasized that remote viewing was never expected to be perfect. They compared it to gathering fragments of a puzzle rather than receiving a complete photograph. A session might correctly identify a body of water, a large industrial structure, and nearby mountains, while getting the finer details completely wrong. Even partial success, they argued, could have intelligence value when combined with satellite imagery, intercepted communications, or human sources. Some psychologists proposed that remote viewing might involve subtle aspects of perception not yet understood. Others speculated about quantum physics, although most physicists cautioned that there was no accepted scientific theory linking quantum mechanics to psychic abilities. The word quantum became popular in discussions of consciousness, but invoking quantum theory did not, by itself, provide evidence that remote viewing was possible. Critics were equally convinced that the evidence was unpersuasive. They argued that many successful sessions relied on vague language that could fit a wide variety of targets. Descriptions such as a large structure, water nearby, or metal objects are common enough that they may seem impressive after the correct target is revealed. This is sometimes called the Barnum effect or retrospective fitting, where broad statements appear highly specific once people know the answer. Another concern was confirmation bias. People naturally remember remarkable successes and forget the many unsuccessful attempts. If hundreds of remote viewing sessions are conducted, a few impressive coincidences are statistically inevitable. Without carefully examining all of the data, including the failures, it becomes difficult to judge whether genuine psychic perception occurred. Researchers also worried about information leakage. Even subtle, unconscious clues from an interviewer could influence a participant's responses. A change in facial expression, a pause in conversation, a slight shift in tone. These seemingly insignificant cues can sometimes guide people without either person realizing it. For this reason, later experiments adopted increasingly strict, double-blind procedures, ensuring that neither the viewer nor the session monitor knew the target in advance. Even then, the results remained controversial. Some independent researchers reported small but statistically significant effects. Others attempted to replicate the findings and found no convincing evidence. The scientific community never reached a consensus. Most mainstream scientists concluded that the available evidence did not justify accepting remote viewing as a proven phenomenon. At the same time, a small number of researchers argued that dismissing the results entirely overlooked intriguing statistical patterns worthy of further study. Within the intelligence community, opinions were similarly divided. Some officers believed remote viewing occasionally provided useful leads. Others saw it as unreliable and unsuitable for operational decision-making. This division would ultimately shape the program's future. By the early 1990s, the Cold War had ended. Budgets were shrinking. Government agencies faced increasing pressure to justify every research program with measurable results. Project Stargate, which had survived for more than 20 years, was about to undergo its most important evaluation. An independent review would determine whether the program had produced intelligence valuable enough to continue. Its conclusions would effectively decide the fate of one of the most unusual government experiments ever undertaken. Part 6. The CIA Review and the End of Project Stargate. By the mid-1990s, Project Stargate had reached a crossroads. For more than 20 years, millions of dollars had been spent investigating whether remote viewing could serve as a practical intelligence tool. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Intelligence priorities were changing. Programs that had once seemed essential during the intense rivalry between East and West were now being carefully re-examined. In 1995, responsibility for Project Stargate was transferred to the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA's first task was straightforward: determine whether the program had produced reliable, actionable intelligence. If it had, the research might continue. If it had not, the project would come to an end. To ensure an impartial assessment, the CIA commissioned the American Institutes for Research to conduct an independent evaluation. Two experts with very different backgrounds were selected to review decades of data. One was psychologist Dr. Ray Hyman, a well-known skeptic of paranormal claims. The other was statistician Dr. Jessica Utz, who had previously analyzed research into psychic phenomena and believed the statistical evidence deserved serious consideration. Their conclusions would become central to the debate surrounding Project Stargate. After reviewing the available research, Jessica Utz concluded that the experimental results were statistically significant. She argued that the accumulated evidence suggested something unusual was occurring that could not easily be explained by chance alone. In her view, the experiments warranted continued scientific investigation. However, she also acknowledged that statistical significance did not necessarily mean remote viewing was ready for operational intelligence work. Ray Hyman reached a different conclusion. While he agreed that some experiments appeared interesting, he argued that weaknesses in methodology, inconsistent replication, and insufficient controls prevented any firm conclusions from being drawn. He maintained that extraordinary claims required extraordinarily strong evidence. In his opinion, that standard had not been met. The CIA also examined the program from a practical standpoint. Even if remote viewing occasionally produced accurate information, intelligence officers needed results that were timely, reliable, and consistent. Operational intelligence requires confidence. Military commanders cannot base critical decisions on information that may or may not be correct. After reviewing both the scientific findings and the operational record, the CIA concluded that Project Stargate had not demonstrated sufficient value as an intelligence tool. The program was officially terminated in 1995. Much of its documentation was declassified in the years that followed. For the first time, the public could read thousands of pages describing experiments, operational sessions, research reports, and internal evaluations. What many people expected to find was proof of astonishing psychic abilities or proof of an elaborate government deception. Instead, they discovered something far more complicated. The records revealed a genuine government effort to investigate remote viewing. The experiments were real. The funding was real. The participants were real. but the evidence was often ambiguous. Some sessions appeared remarkably impressive, others were clearly inaccurate. Many fell somewhere in between. This complexity has helped keep the debate alive for decades. Believers see the declassified documents as confirmation that governments took psychic research seriously because they observed genuine results. Skeptics argue that governments have investigated many unconventional ideas throughout history, and that investigating a claim does not mean the claim is true. In many ways, Project Stargate ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with uncertainty. The government had spent decades searching for evidence that consciousness could be used as an intelligence tool. The final conclusion was neither a definitive success nor an absolute failure. Instead, it was a recognition that the available evidence did not justify continued operational funding. Yet the story did not end there. Once the files became public, Project Stargate took on a second life. Authors, filmmakers, journalists, and internet communities began exploring the documents, interviewing former participants, and proposing new interpretations. What had once been one of America's most closely guarded intelligence programs was about to become one of its most enduring mysteries. Part 7. Legacy, Popular Culture, and the Continuing Mystery. Although Project Stargate officially ended in 1995, its influence was only beginning. Once the program's files were declassified, journalists, researchers, and the general public gained access to thousands of pages of documents that had once been closely guarded secrets. For many people, the revelation was astonishing. The question was no longer whether the U.S. government had investigated psychic phenomena. The documents clearly showed that it had. The new question became far more difficult. What, if anything, had the researchers actually discovered? Former participants began writing books describing their experiences. Some maintained that remote viewing was a genuine human ability that could be developed through training and discipline. They argued that the government had ended the program for political and budgetary reasons rather than scientific ones. Others suggested that the most successful operations remained classified and had never been released to the public. These claims have never been conclusively verified. Former intelligence officials have offered differing opinions over the years. Some described the program as worthwhile and believed it occasionally produced valuable information. Others regarded it as an interesting experiment that never became reliable enough for real-world intelligence work. These conflicting accounts have helped keep the mystery alive. Hollywood soon became interested as well. Films, television documentaries, podcasts, and countless YouTube channels began exploring Project Stargate and the broader subject of remote viewing. Some productions stayed relatively close to the historical record. Others mixed documented events with speculation, conspiracy theories, and fictional storytelling. As a result, separating fact from fiction became increasingly difficult. Project Stargate also became linked, often inaccurately, with a wide range of unrelated mysteries. Area 51, UFO investigations, ancient civilizations, time travel, interdimensional beings, secret underground bases. While these subjects frequently appear together in books and online discussions, there is little documented evidence connecting them directly to the official Stargate program. Most government records describe a far narrower mission, evaluating whether remote viewing could assist intelligence operations. This distinction is important because the real story is already extraordinary without adding unsupported claims. Today, remote viewing continues to be practiced by some researchers, private organizations, and enthusiasts around the world. Training courses are available, books explain various techniques, online communities share experiments and compare results. Some participants report surprisingly accurate experiences. Others find no evidence that the methods work at all. Scientific opinion remains largely unchanged. Most mainstream researchers conclude that existing evidence has not demonstrated remote viewing under consistently repeatable laboratory conditions. However, a small number of scientists continue to investigate consciousness, perception, and anomalous experiences, believing there are still unanswered questions worth exploring. Project Stargate occupies a unique place in history. It reminds us that governments sometimes investigate ideas that seem improbable, especially during periods of international tension. History contains many examples of unconventional research that ultimately led nowhere. It also contains examples of ideas once considered impossible that later became accepted science. Determining which category Project Stargate belongs in remains a matter of ongoing debate. Perhaps its greatest legacy is not whether remote viewing works. Instead, it lies in the questions the program forced researchers to confront. How much do we truly understand about consciousness? Can the human mind perceive more than modern science currently explains? Or do remarkable coincidences and powerful psychological biases simply create the illusion of extraordinary abilities? These questions continue to inspire curiosity decades after the final remote viewing session was completed. Whether one views Project Stargate as groundbreaking research, an ambitious intelligence experiment, or an intriguing historical curiosity, its story serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge often leads into unexpected territory. And sometimes, the greatest mystery is not what we discover, but what we have yet to understand. Part 8. What the declassified documents actually reveal. One of the most remarkable aspects of Project Stargate is that much of its history no longer relies on rumor. Thousands of pages of government documents have been declassified, allowing historians, researchers, journalists, and curious readers to examine the program for themselves. These files provide a fascinating glimpse into how intelligence agencies approached one of the most unconventional research projects in modern history. The documents include research reports, operational summaries, training manuals, statistical analyses, internal memoranda, remote viewing transcripts, hand-drawn sketches created during viewing sessions, and correspondence between scientists, military officers, and intelligence officials. Taken together, they reveal a program that was far more methodical than many people imagine. Rather than dramatic scenes of psychics closing their eyes and instantly describing enemy headquarters in perfect detail, most remote viewing sessions were surprisingly ordinary. A viewer would sit quietly at a desk. A monitor would record everything that was said. The viewer would describe impressions as they arose. Sometimes they produced simple sketches. Sometimes they reported only a handful of vague sensations. The sessions often lasted an hour or more. Many generated little useful information. Others produced descriptions that participants considered unusually accurate. One striking feature of the records is how cautious many researchers were. Contrary to popular belief, most scientists involved with the program did not claim they had proven psychic abilities beyond all doubt. Instead, they frequently discussed experimental limitations, potential sources of error, the need for better controls, and the importance of repeating successful experiments under increasingly rigorous conditions. This cautious language reflects the scientific process itself. Researchers rarely declare certainty after a few promising results. Instead, they seek replication, independent verification, and statistical confidence. Many of the declassified reports emphasize exactly these concerns. The operational files are equally intriguing. Some remote viewing sessions were directed toward military installations. Others focused on missing aircraft, hostage situations, suspected terrorist activities, weapons development, foreign research facilities, and occasionally personalities of interest within rival governments. In many cases, analysts compared remote viewing reports with information gathered through satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, intercepted communications, and human intelligence sources. Remote viewing was generally treated as supplementary information rather than primary intelligence. This distinction is often overlooked. Contrary to popular myth, intelligence agencies did not replace spies with psychics. Instead, they explored whether remote viewing might occasionally provide additional clues worth investigating. Some documents suggest analysts found certain sessions interesting enough to pursue further. Others were quickly dismissed. The records also reveal that not everyone within the intelligence community supported the program. Internal debates were common. Some officers believed the research deserved continued funding. Others questioned its scientific foundation from the very beginning. This disagreement persisted throughout the program's existence. Perhaps the greatest lesson from the declassified files is that reality is often less sensational, but more interesting than legend. The documents neither prove that psychic abilities exist nor expose an elaborate government hoax. Instead, they document a sincere attempt by scientists and intelligence officials to answer an extraordinary question using the tools available to them. For more than 20 years, they gathered data, tested volunteers, refined experimental methods, argued over results, and ultimately concluded that the evidence was not strong enough to justify continued operational use. Yet even today, researchers continue examining those same documents. Some believe they contain overlooked evidence of genuine anomalous perception. Others view them as valuable case studies in human psychology, statistical reasoning, and the challenges of investigating extraordinary claims. Whatever conclusion one reaches, the declassified records stand as a rare historical archive. They allow us to look inside one of the most unusual intelligence programs ever conducted, not through speculation or rumor, but through the government's own reports, written as events unfolded. And in doing so, they leave us with one final question. If a modern government faced the same uncertainties today, would it investigate the possibility of remote viewing all over again? Conclusion: an open mind, guided by evidence project. Stargate occupies a fascinating place in modern history. It sits at the crossroads of science, intelligence, psychology, and the enduring human fascination with the unknown. For more than 2 decades, the U.S. government invested time, money, and expertise into a question that many people dismissed outright. Could the human mind perceive information beyond the reach of the known senses? The answer, even after years of research, remained elusive. Some experiments produced results that continue to intrigue researchers. Certain remote viewing sessions appeared surprisingly accurate. Participants described locations, structures, and objects that seemed difficult to explain through ordinary means alone. To supporters, these cases suggest that human consciousness may possess capabilities science has not yet fully understood. To skeptics, they illustrate the importance of rigorous testing, careful statistical analysis, and the many ways in which coincidence, suggestion, and confirmation bias can create the appearance of extraordinary success. Both perspectives contribute something valuable. Science advances by remaining open to new possibilities while demanding reliable evidence. Extraordinary ideas should neither be accepted uncritically nor rejected without careful investigation. Project Stargate serves as an example of that balance. It demonstrates that governments are sometimes willing to explore unconventional ideas when national security is involved. It also reminds us that investigating a phenomenon is not the same as proving it. Perhaps the greatest legacy of Project Stargate is not whether remote viewing ultimately succeeded or failed. Its true significance lies in the questions it raised about the nature of consciousness itself. Despite remarkable advances in neuroscience, psychology, and physics, the human mind remains one of the least understood frontiers of science. How awareness arises from the brain, how intuition sometimes seems remarkably accurate, why certain experiences feel profoundly meaningful. These are questions that researchers continue to explore. Project Stargate became one chapter in that larger story. Whether history eventually views it as a pioneering scientific investigation, a product of Cold War urgency, or an ambitious experiment that reached beyond the available evidence, it remains one of the most unusual intelligence programs ever officially documented. Its existence reminds us that curiosity often leads researchers into unexpected territory. Sometimes those journeys transform our understanding of the world. Sometimes they reveal the limits of our knowledge, and sometimes they do both at the same time. As more historical records become available and new generations revisit the evidence, the debate surrounding Project Stargate will almost certainly continue. Believers will point to its most compelling successes. Skeptics will emphasize its inconsistencies and methodological weaknesses. Neither side is likely to settle the question completely. In the end, perhaps the most sensible approach is the same one adopted by the best investigators throughout history. Remain curious. Question extraordinary claims. Examine the evidence carefully. Be willing to change your mind when the facts warrant it. And recognize that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because they are impossible to answer, but because humanity is still searching for the right questions. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the remarkable history of Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop wondering what may still lie beyond the limits of human understanding.